Yeah, thanks for being here early in the morning after the second day. That's always the toughest spot, I think. Um, yeah, I was asked to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, things we're doing at NextCloud, and of course, a bigger picture, what it means for the open source community. So when I started developing this software over 10 years ago, the goal, as Patrick already said, was to have an open source free software alternative to these big tech companies, to have like a full alternative to Microsoft 365, to Google Workspace, Zoom, Slack, Dropbox, and so on. This is just a bit of the direction. This is also what motivates me personally, because I don't want to live in a world where just 5 big companies control everything we do and say and store and do in our digital life. This is why NextCloud is structured in a similar way. We have NextCloud Files. This is a little bit like OneDrive or Google Drive. There's NextCloud Talk for chat video conferencing, Groupware, Office, and so on. Very similar to these big tech companies, as I said, with the main differences, obviously, that everything we do is 100% open source and everything can be run like locally wherever you want. A lot of people run it on a Raspberry Pi just at home or at your university or soccer club, or it also scales up obviously to big governments and big service providers. The biggest installation that we are working with has 20 million users. So it's really from 2 users at home on Raspberry Pi to 20 million with the same open source software. The functionality, let's go through it a little bit. NextCloud Files, usual file management, as you know, it has other features like sharing and tagging and searching and so on. Then there is a chat application, very similar to Microsoft Teams or Slack, with group chats, one-on-one chats with all the usual features. I'm not going into details here too much. Then, of course, you can press a video call button, and then it turns into a video conferencing system. Again, one of the very, very few that runs completely local on your infrastructure. There's a calendar with sharing and invitations and free busy and all the usual things you expect. A very powerful, nice mail client for managing all your emails. And there's, of course, also NextCloud Office, with something we do together with our friends from Collabra, which makes it possible to edit Office documents in the browser collaboratively together. So this is what we do. This was the situation 1.5 years ago. Life was good. Everything was great. We had best open source solution in this space. And then, obviously, there was a bit of a disruption. It's called AI. AI is an interesting thing. This is a big chance and also a big threat for the open source movement, depending how we handle this going forward. Of course, AI has a lot of potential to make our life better. So it can be our friend, it can be our assistant, it can be our friendly helper to automate boring things we don't want to care about. We have this nice friendly robot who is just there and supporting us, make our life better and easier. That's possible. But obviously there's also the dark side of AI, right? I mean, it can also threaten our society, it can threaten our lives. I mean, we don't need to mention Skynet, other things there. Science fiction has a lot of fantasy about things that can go wrong here. I don't know how realistic they are, but there's definitely a threat here about negative consequences. And I think I'm not the only one who thinks that. If you look into the press, you see that a lot of big companies are banning the use of ChatGPT and other assistants. You see like Apple and Goldman Sachs and some other big organizations, they're just banning the use of ChatGPT. Why is that? First of all, they're afraid of hallucination, of course. But they're also very afraid of privacy problems, because all these big companies like Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, and so on, they're obviously using your data that you give them to train their models, to improve it for the next version. So it is absolutely possible that if, I don't know, Airbus is using ChatGPT to discuss some documents, then a little bit later, Boeing asking a question and get results that are based on the documents of Airbus. Right? That's absolutely possible. So this is why these organizations are very critical about the use of AI. And I also sometimes say that this also like created a little bit of a depression on my side 1.5 years ago, because there are two problems here that became visible. The first is, can we as a small open source company, can we even compete here? Obviously, these AI systems are super complex, they need a lot of resources. So can an open source community even compete there? We're competing with building a software, we're quite good with it, but AI is just another level. So can we even do that? And the second question is, of course, do we want to? Because as I said earlier, at NextCloud, and of course most of the open source community, we follow some ethical reasons, some standards, because we want to give people privacy and control of their digital lives and so on. So these whole AI features, are they threatening our goals? Are they going against our goals? Should we actually do it or not? And that's really a bit of an open question. So 1.5 years ago, we started to check, to explore what we can do with these two questions. So the first thing we did, talking with a lot of experts out there, a lot of internal discussions, external discussions, what we created is an ethical AI framework. So this is, I think we were quite early by then with doing that. I'm super, super happy that most of the thoughts are actually now into the open source AI definition from the OSI. It's closely related, which I think shows that there must be something to it if people have the same opinion. So, but we created this ethical AI framework to bring everything we do and everything others do into a perspective, to basically say, is this a good thing or not? Or is it maybe gray in the area? And should we do it or not? And what is the risk associated to it? Of course, ethical AI, ethical is always a big question because it's different viewpoints. In the case here, it's not so difficult to identify possible problems. You can just read the press and there are lots of problems written about. The first question is discrimination. As you know, these models are trained with data on the internet, and the internet is full with biases. And of course, then the question is, okay, these models, do they also have biases or not? They definitely do, spoiler. So if you go to some image generation model system and you ask, hey, can you create like a photo of a doctor? Then you probably get a photo of a white man. That's just how it is, because that's also how the internet, how the internet looks like. So this is a question that we wanted to solve, or need to at least think about it. Second question, what about the CO2 footprint? And as we know, we have all these gigantic server farms, all these huge GPUs that generate or that consume a lot of power. So what is the CO2 footprint here? Is this a good thing to do or not? Privacy, I already talked about it. What data goes into the model? Is it my private data? Is it public data? What is really the consequence there? And then last but not least, of course, the question, is this even freely available? One big thing about open source movement is not only that it gives you all these freedoms and to see the source code and so on, it also is super important, for example, for the global south. People who can't afford to have expensive Microsoft subscriptions, right? And that gives them access to technology. And do we move into a future where only like rich people have access to AI and others not? So it's also an open question. So what we did then is that we created this ethical AI framework where we created this traffic light system with different levels of ethical and non-ethical, let's say it like that. And the question is, of course, how we measure that. And what we did is we came up with like 3 requirements. The first requirement is that the code should be open source. And with code, I mean code to train the model, but also code to interfere with the model to use it. Why is this important? Because if the code is open and available, you can run it locally, first of all, and you can also actually measure the energy consumption. This is something you cannot do with ChatGPT and all these other systems, right? You just put it into the black box and then something happens, but you have no idea what's going on. I'm sure that Microsoft and the others, they're happily paying their hosting bills, But we all know they also have other business models, so it's not really clear how much this actually costs and what the CO2 footprint is. But if the code can be run locally, you can measure it and you can optimize it over time. You already see this. If new versions of PyTorch or other libraries come out, they're already getting faster and faster. You can actually measure what the energy consumption here is. The second is that the model should be available because only then you can run it locally. I'm a big believer in having the stuff local. NextCloud, the whole point is to have it local, and the AI system should have the same, because then you know that no data is leaking somewhere else. So that's very important. And then the last point, the most controversial one, is that the training data should also be available, because then you can look inside and you can see if there's a bias, you can reproduce it, and you can actually build on top of it. So the training data is a little bit like a source code, in my opinion, while the model is then something like a binary. But of course, we already had lots of great discussions yesterday, and I think this is a definition we need to rework that. Maybe we skip this and adopt the definition from the OSI when it's done. So it's an ongoing discussion, because maybe having the training data available is not realistic, because with these big models, the training data is the internet, and you cannot have the internet available. So this is tricky. But I still think that transparency here is important, because then you actually know what's going on. If you don't know the source code, then it's just the black box. So this is the first thing we did. I think we created this framework to put everything into perspective, which is a good thing. And the second is we heavily invested in the development of AI features and models. We created our own team. And the first thing we did, we created a NextCloud Assistant, which is a system in NextCloud that is based on several large language models, 100% open source, and runs completely local. The NextCloud Assistant is not a monolithic thing. It's actually quite flexible. And what you can do is you can actually choose what kind of backend you want to use. So for example, these are the admin settings. For example, if you look into the translation system you have, you can choose if you want to use the ChatGPT API for that, or you want to use a completely running local model from the University of Helsinki. Or the next one, if you care about speech to text, if you want to dictate, again, you can choose if you want to have something, a software as a service on the internet, or something completely local. So you always have these choices. So the NextCloud Assistant basically has different backends, and you can choose which one you want and which one you like. So we have different models, and let's go through this here, that can be configured in the assistant. The first is we have a number of models that we built ourselves here. For example, for email classification, for login behavior, and some other things. I will show it in a second there. This is something you can choose to use. Or you can use other locally open source LLMs that run locally. That is also fully supported, and there are a number of good ones available like today. Or you can use some models that we also built as NextCloud, which are fine-tuned models of existing ones. Fine-tuning is a system where you can basically enrich the model with additional data, additional information that's not in the original one. And you can also combine this with a special system using a vector database. I will show it in a second. Then it becomes even more local and even more customized. Something that, by the way, Apple announced on Monday. Also a similar feature. We have this already for several months. Or what you can do if you don't really want to host the models yourself, because the first 4 options here are of hosting it yourself. You can say, no, I don't have the resources, I don't have the GPUs in the servers. You can also use large language models as a service. And we have partnerships with companies like OVH or Plus Server or Ionos, and they're providing this as a service if you want to. And last but not least, obviously, you can also use the OpenAI and all the other proprietary systems where we also have support. So as an admin of a NextCloud server, you can choose between these different options. And you can already see a little bit on the left side is like green in our traffic light system, because all requirements are fulfilled. And the right side is obviously red. So you're in control of what you're doing. The fine-tuning we are doing is also interesting. So last year we announced a partnership with the German government. So the German government will provide us with training data that we use to create like a special large language model, which is optimized for the way German bureaucrats speak, which is a bit special, of course. Then we have a system that the government can use to create like easy letters and other things. So that's a very nice, interesting partnership we have there. Then a little bit, what does it actually do? It's great to have all these large language models. What do we actually do with it? We have a number of, actually for several years, of more easy AI features, like you can get recommendations who want to share a file with. You can have like, I don't know, a smart inbox in email. You can have recommendation of files like, hey, every morning, and if you go to the office, you always open this one file and you get it directly recommended and so on. So we already have some more lightweight AI systems for a long time, but let's talk a little bit more about the more interesting, more advanced features. The first thing that's obviously there is a chat interface. So you can then, at any time in NextCloud, just press this button on the top. You get this interface where you can interact with your assistant in a very similar way like ChatGPT and others. That's quite easy and I think a bit boring. Very more interesting is actually the integration into the other applications that we have. So let's start, for example, with NextCloud Text. NextCloud Text is a text editor, markdown editor that is built into NextCloud, but it's also the same for NextCloud Office, for Collabora, and many other places. So let's say you're in your NextCloud and you want to edit a text file, then you can please open the document. It opens, you can mark a text, and then the assistant button shows up, and then you can say, I want to summarize it, I want to translate it, I want to reformulate it, and it just gives you the results very easily, and then you can check if it's correct. In this case, it generates a headline. Just copy it and insert it on top of the text. So that's very powerful at any time, and this works like in emails and chat messages everywhere. You work with text, you can directly manipulate the text directly inline. You don't need to copy things around. Then mail is of course also very important. NextCloud Mail, we have lots of integrations. So on the left side, you see the priority inbox. So it already like learns from your behavior, what are the important mails, and they're listed on top. And then another thing here is a email thread summary. So I don't know about you, but I get a lot of emails. You probably too. You don't have the time to read all of them. And NextCloud Mail can give you a summary of all of the complete email thread directly here on top of the list, which is very useful. Then obviously it can help you with writing emails. Maybe you don't have the time to write a long email about something. Obviously the assistant can directly say, hey, here's an email that fits the need. And it can also in the latest version suggest answers to emails. So if you get an email, and you can already like with one button say, okay, this probably should be answered in that way, and it gives you a recommendation, and you can just directly send it. Then we have NextCloud Talk. That's our chat and video conferencing solution. There we have also lots of nice integrations, for example, translations. So NextCloud, for example, we as a company, we have people in 23 countries, so we're very international. So sometimes it's useful to just have like live translations of chat messages in different languages. So that's something we have integrated, and that works like nicely out of the box. Another thing that's very popular is, of course, image generation. Sometimes you're in the middle of a brainstorming discussion and you want to just visualize something, and you can just type in here, I want to have some cat photos. Every good IT presentation needs cat photos, of course. So here's the cat photo. You can just generate it with one click and post it into the chat, and people can then talk about it. In real life, it probably would not be cats, but some visualization of some other thing. And any time when you're in a chat conversation, let's say you're in a marketing chat, at any time you can say add assistant and ask a question. So the assistant is basically always there and can always be asked. In this case, you can ask, hey, what is needed to organize a nice conference like this one? And just gives you directly, like a human being, directly the answer in the chat, and you can just query the knowledge at any time. That's very nice. Then also have the option to summarize chat messages. I don't know if you know the problem. Maybe you come after vacation back to the office, you open your chat application, you have like 5,000 unread messages. Who has time to read all of that? You can at any time just say, hey, give me a summary, and it summarizes the history and gives you a nice overview of what was discussed when you were away. That's very useful. Then there is a dictation system. So if you want to dictate your emails or your documents, that's directly built in. Like again, as everything is local here, everything is open source, stays on your device. You can have very nice local dictations of your documents. We use the same thing for transcripts of video calls. So if you're in a video call, you can say, hey, I want to have a transcript and also maybe then a summary of the transcript. So if you miss an important call, you can then later just read up what happened. So these are some of the, let's say, more obvious features. And they are all available in production today with completely locally running LLMs. But we wanted to do something a bit more fancy, a little bit cooler. I showed you earlier in the slide that we work with vector databases. That's an interesting technology where you can combine local knowledge with the large language model. Because everything I showed you so far gives you answers that are based on the training data that went into the creation of the model many months or years ago. Right? But wouldn't it be great if my assistant really knows all my emails, my calendar, my to-dos, my documents, everything? And this is something we built with context chat. So you can go into email, for example, into NextCloud Mail, and you can say, hey, what is the status with this customer? And the assistant can then look through all your emails and summarize a very nice answer for you, what the status there is. So that's obviously a very nice and powerful feature. Technically, it works in a way that all the content is stored in a local vector database. That's like a multi-dimensional database that's connected with something called LangChain to an LLM. And you can then basically query all your knowledge in your system. It also works for other places. This, for example, is NextCloud Deck. This is our project management tool. And then you can just go into one of the boards and say, hey, what is important when you are to organize an event? And it just looks all to the tickets that were there before and gives you a nice summary about what's important to organize an event. Another feature is context write. So you can create a document based on some other document. For example, maybe you have a PDF or a letter or something, and you can say, okay, this was already a nice letter. I used this last year, but now I have some modifications. You can say, take this letter, but please like change make it more friendly, make it more longer, adapt it to, I don't know, this and that. And it creates just a new document based on the other document with the new modifications. That's something that's quite useful. So this is an overview of the current AI features we have. So first of all, I can say that my depression is a bit over because I think we have answers for the two questions. First of all, I think there is a way to put all these features in an ethical framework, again, with the help of the OSI, also to put it into context, what is a good AI system, what is not so good AI system. I think this is very helpful. And it is actually possible for small companies to compete. So the open source community, especially the AI open source community, did awesome work the last 1.5 years. And there are actually so many tools and so many models available, and we're all collaborating with each other. NextCloud is also part of this community, of course, and there are actually a lot of things we can do. So I'm really happy that I realized that big tech doesn't have a huge advantage. We can actually compete here and do a lot. Yesterday, we heard a lot of great talks, several great talks about what the open source initiative is doing. I really admire this a lot. I think this is super important work, and I want to encourage all of you to be part of the discussion. As I said, our ethical AI initiative is 1.5 years old, a lot older than what the OSI is doing here. I think maybe we can bring this somehow together to do the criteria, to harmonize them a bit. And of course, I heard yesterday a very good point about the availability of the training data. Maybe it's not realistic that we just say, hey, all training data needs to be Creative Commons or whatever. It's just not how the internet works. So it is a bit of a challenge, but we make good progress. So now we have lots of interesting AI systems. We have maybe soon the OSI definition, which is great. But I still think, for my last slide, I think we together as open source community still have to get together and work a little bit more on strategies. Because there are still so many open questions that are unrelated to definitions, policies, licenses, and other things. Should we just ignore it? I mean, I already said, I think we can't. We need to shape it. We need to shape the AI revolution that goes into a good way. But of course, what does it mean in detail? How does it work with our communities? So I got into open source 25 years ago because I was just sitting in my student apartment. I was just hacking some KDE code, and that's playing around with it and then contributing it, and I just got into it. This is how a lot of open source people in the community got into the development. How does this work with AI? I cannot just sit in my basement and train my own LLM. I don't have the resources, I don't have the data, there's really nothing I can do there. So what effect does this has on our community? Our open source community is a very, very important thing. Access to data, we already talked about it. Like, this is also a legal uncertainty. Like, even if the data is available, like available in I have it, am I allowed to use it? That's a very open question. What about the compute to train those models? Again, maybe a company like us, we can do it, but does a student can do it? I'm not sure. So this is a big question. Are we killing, or is the community, or is the community dying because they don't have the resources? Like 25 years ago, I can fire up my C++ compiler on my laptop, not a problem. But this is a whole another level here. Then what about companies? Big strength of open source is that you can stand on the shoulders of giants, that you can build innovation on top of other innovation. That is so important. So how does this work? If I take an LLM and I do fine-tuning on top of it, what does this mean? Is this derived work? Do I have to follow the same license? Is this even legal? Can I redistribute it or not? These are all completely open questions, and I think we need to answer that. It's like the foundation of the open source movement. We cannot just ignore it. Again, is this available to everybody? Is just people with big servers and Microsoft and Google subscriptions have access to it? Does everybody have access to it? A big question. And at the end, of course, most important, what's the consequences to the citizens, to the normal people? What impact does this have on privacy and security, and again, controlling our life? As I said at the very beginning, the motivation for me was that I want to be in control of my digital life. This is why I started NextCloud. And people still in control of their life if they use some LLM, which are black boxes, you don't know what's going on. So it's all very, very important questions, and I think we need to figure this out together. Thanks a lot.